A small boy with light pale skin and dark diamond eyes sat up in his room, wrapping his arms around his pale little legs. He was crying as he heard yells and bad words coming from downstairs. I wish they would stop, Drew thought, wiping the tears from his eyes. No, Greg, you don't understand. What do you really think it's like every night for a wife to see her husband come home and is either half drunk or is beat up? What is going on with you? Abby yelled, throwing her arms around the sides of frustration. Jesus, Abby, it's just... Greg sighed, looking down and rubbing his forehead. I work for a business that I just can't tell you right now. Okay, listen, it's hurting my heart and I can't tell you. But as soon as you understand, I promise, Greg said, walking over and taking both of her hands into his. Listen, love. His voice trailed off as Abby smacked him across the face. You're cheating on me, aren't you? She whispered and started to cry. Greg looked down ashamed. No, he said in a true voice. Abby didn't know what to think. I'm going to go for a ride for a while. I'll be back, she said, as she left them all alone in the living room with the fire. Draken was now 11, and so many things had changed in his life since he was a baby. He had gone to school every day. He would walk and sometimes ride his little green and silver bike whenever the weather was nice and warm. At school, he didn't have that many friends. Drew would come home every day and go upstairs with a snack to do his homework in his room. He loved to sit by the window, which faced the back of his house. He loved to feel the cold crystal breeze slightly blow into his face and looked over the field along with the barn. Walking upstairs, Abby looked into Draken's room and didn't see him. Drew? She asked as she slowly walked in and looking around. I'm over here, Mom, he whispered, as she saw him in a ball in the darkness of the corner they could find. Drew, what are you doing? She asked kindly, as she walked up to him and took him by the hand, leading him out of the dark place. I'm scared, and I just don't want you and Daddy to fight anymore, he said, wiping his tears from his little black eyes. Oh, baby, Abby said, kneeling down with one knee so that she was face to face with him. It's going to be okay. You don't have to worry. Whatever happens between me and your father, we'll both love you very much and will always be there for you. And with that, little Drew hugged her face close and cried silently on her shoulder. I just want all this to stop. Up. Abby thought to herself as she held her son in her arms. Hey, she said, looking back at him to face. Why don't you and I go feed the horses? Want to go for a ride them? She asked, winking at him with a welcoming smile. Yeah, Drew said joyfully, jumping up and down. Come on, Drewy, let's go, Abby said, taking his hand and walking out of the house with him. When they got downstairs, Draken saw his father, who was crying in the palms on his chair in the living room. They both stopped and stared at him for a moment. Come on, your dad is going to be okay, Abby said, taking him out of the house, but Drew let go of Abby's hand and ran over to his dad. Hi, Daddy, are you okay? He asked, wiping the tears from his dad's eyes as he looked at his son, laughing slightly as he hugged him close. Yes, Drew, I'm going to be okay, thank you. And I love you, Greg said, hugging him some more. And with that, Abby and Drew went out to feed the horses and possibly went for a ride together. Draken and his mother always did something with the horses when they were stressed or want to be together, or something just for fun. The sun was brisk and it was beautiful, calm afternoon. The blue and black birds were singing joyfully songs as they made their way to the barn. Ginger had died when Drew turned 2, and it was very hard and depressing for Abby to put her down. But they had to. Next to the barn, Greg had built a little small cemetery with a wired fence and a wired gate. There was a marble gravestone that sat in the middle of it, and it was surrounded by flowers and such. It read, Ginger, my loving horse, I will always keep within my heart. Love, Abby and Greg. Whenever Abby saw that stone, it made her sad, but it did make her feel that she was not alone. She knew that Ginger went to horse heaven and would always be with her someday. Come on, Mom, Draken giggled, dancing around in circles in the field as he made his way to the barn. I'm coming, she said, with her hands in her pockets and walking at a slow pace. Looking down, she studied her sneakers and forgot she tied them, but she didn't care. Getting up to the barn, she opened the gate that Drew was trying to get, but it was too high for him. "It's okay, baby, I've got it," Abby said, unlocking it, and he ran inside. "I want Kelly and you to have America," Draken said, picking up piles of golden hay in his hands and throwing them over the gates to the hungry horses. "Oh, so I get America, and who's 12 years old, and you get Kelly? Who's that, 5? Abby laughed as she picked up the pitchfork, making sure Drew was out of her way, and dug it into some more golden hay and dumped it over the gates. Crunching away at the horses did as Drew and his mother cleaned up the barn. "So what do you want to do when you grow up, son?" Abby asked, about talking out of the bedroom and dusting away the brown and dirty hay that lay on the dirt floor of the barn. "I was think of a scientist, maybe. I really don't know," Drew said, rubbing his chin as he climbed at the top of the hay loft above where his mother was standing. "I was just wondering," she asked. "When did you have the idea you wanted to have me?" Draken asked, swinging from his feet to the hole where he would climb down. Abby laughed and just looked up at him. "Well, it was quite expected, actually. I guess your father and I met, and what I'm saying is, yes, we did meet at a party and start to date. And after a while, we were in so much love that we ended up having you," she said in a dreamy voice. Remember the day she found out she was pregnant with Drew. "Cool," he said in a distant voice. Wood looked out the window, and what was next to him? He saw a bird flying down to her baby's brown-wedded nest. "Mom," Drew whispered, keeping his eyes on the baby birds. "What?" she whispered back, smiling with the same laughter at that game they were playing. "I see a mommy bird with her baby birds," he said, smiling back down at her. "Wow," Abby said, walking out to his side and looking up to see them. "Hey, Drew," Abby said in a nervous voice. "Yeah," he responded. "Be careful, don't walk around too much. It's not safe," she said, backing in, but it was too late. Little curious Draken was already on his feet and was walking around upstairs. It wasn't until she was putting down the broom away when she had heard a loud crack and saw him come down through the floor and hit his body on the solid ground. "Drew!" Abby screamed, rushing to his side. His body was limp and cold. There was an uproar of the horses, and they saw and heard what had happened and were screaming in fright. "Be quiet!" she yelled in her direction, but none of them listened to her. "Drew," she said, taking him slightly. "Oh God, let him be okay. I warned him. I shouldn't have let him go up there. Abby, you jerk," she fought as she brushed the black hair out of her face. His eyes started to flutter a bit as he looked around the ground. "Mom," Draken moaned, looking up at her. "Honey, are you okay? You scared the living daylights out of me," she said in a worried tone. "Yeah, I'm okay." "Ouch," Drew said, wailing in pain as he tried to sit up. His left arm was limp and wouldn't move. "Oh, my arm," he said, as little rivers of tears streamed down his face. "Oh no, you might have broken your arm," Abby said in horror. "What? Oh, great," Drew said, rolling his wet eyes. "Listen," Abby instructed. "I'm going to get your father and you're going to lie back down here. Don't move. It'll be all right," she said, getting up quickly and running out of the dusty barn. Draken felt dizzy as he started to close his eyes. The only thing he could remember was that he was going off into sleep when he could not control. The last thing he heard before he woke up in a different place was the horses' screams and horrors of fright. Draken and Shigo's day went very well. Draken had done some work, and Shigo had taken her shower and cleaned up the house so that way it looked better. Draken's mother arrived. He was so nervous. He hadn't seen his mother in 8 years, and he went through all those Helen years with no problem. "Will faint if she sees me," Draken thought, as his world-famous pacing act as Shigo sat in a chair filing her nails. "Will you just relax? She isn't coming until 3 days from now," Shigo said, looking up as she still paced constantly. "No, I won't stop. What if something bad happens and she gets hurt or something like that?" Draken said nervously, looking over at Shigo, who was raising one eyebrow. "Drew, calm down. Everything is going to be all right," she said, putting her nail filer down and wrapping her arms over her legs. Well, maybe you're right. I worry too much, Draken said, sighing and sitting down next to his chair. Listen, you should be happy that you still have a mom. I mean, my mom is long gone, and she was young when she got killed, Shigo said, putting her head down. Draken looked up and was surprised, but saddened by what he had just heard. Someone killed your mother? He asked, walking over and sitting next to Shigo. Yeah, it was Avarius, she muttered, keeping her head down. Oh, Shigo, I'm so sorry, he said sadly, putting his arms around her as she buried her head into his chest. When did that happen? Draken asked. When I was 13, we gotten our powers 2 years ago, and we had beaten Avarius only once. Shigo was telling her story. It was a cold night and my mother was making dinner, and my brothers and I were playing the cards up in our bedrooms. I remember it was like the game war, because of their screaming in an argument. When either of them lost, everything was fine. It was raining, but not too bad, and we were all in the goat tower. And suddenly it felt like an earthquake occurred. Everything was shaking for me, and my brothers started to scream while we were thrown onto the ground in shock. I tried to cry out for my mother, but I was too scared. Right then I thought my world was ending, and there was no way out. As Higo, Migo, and Wego 1 and 2 were still very young, crawled under the table in the playroom. I crawled out of the hallway and yelled for my mother. I looked down as the house shook rapidly. Things were flying in the walls and the plates were smashing everywhere. And then when I saw my mother, and a man held a golden long stick in his hand and was waving it in the air. He had to have been a long crooked nose and a high-pitched voice. He was dressed like a falcon, and he looked like a freak. My mother was whimpering as he held a gun to her head. The bird man was screaming at her to do something and tell him where we were, because he was after our powers. Tears coming down my mother's helpless face as she begged for mercy and wouldn't tell them. That bastard had taken a shot at my mother's head, Shigo said, and tears streamed down her face. Aw, it's okay, don't worry, Draken said, rubbing her back and cooing her, hoping that she would feel better. No, it's okay, I'm alright, Shigo said, sitting up and wiping the little river of tears from her face. Anyway, Shigo said, getting back to her story. As soon as the gun went off into my mother's head, I screamed in horror, holding on to the railings that led downstairs. Avarius couldn't have heard me scream of all the noise. The shaking had stopped, and I quickly ran back to our playroom. I told my brothers that what had happened, and we had hid from that birdman, who searched the house with the golden wand and he held, and a large rock like diamond at the end of it. Pretty colors, Migo whispered, as he looked dreamily at the diamond. I punched him and told Migo that means that reason we don't have our mama anymore. Looking everywhere, called out our names. None of us had moved, and we were entirely moved and entered the playroom and searched everywhere. I remember that I was scared out of my life. I felt that the evil man was going to kill us and take our powers with that golden staff. He finally left and never returned. Expecting we were all died in the quake. He didn't have any of our powers. If our bodies were long gone, he would bury our mother outside the shores of the goat tower. I missed her very much, she said, finishing her story and looking down at her feet. I'm sorry, Shigo. I didn't know, Draken said, feeling bad for his wife, who had just gone through so much in her life. It's okay, she responded, looking up and clapping her hands together. Geez, look at the time. It's like 6. Well, I better be getting dinner ready, Shigo said, leaving the room in the study. Draken put his hands on his palms and felt so bad. And I thought my childhood was bad. Oh, please, he thought, unsure by the questions filled in his mind. I wonder what we're going to name the baby. Draken thought as he coming back to life. Shigo, what are we going to name the baby? Draken asked, hurrying after her. Shigo, Draken said, walking into the kitchen and with her. Yeah, she said, opening the refrigerator. What do you think we should name the baby when he or she is born? Draken asked. What do you like? She said, thinking of what to serve for dinner. If we have a baby boy, I like the names Ryan, Matthew, Sean. I like those names for boy names. But if we had a baby girl, I like the names Roxy, Christy, Raven, and Lily. What do you think? Those are some really nice names, dear. Well, if we did have a boy, I enjoyed the names Drew, Josh, Justin, Brian, Chris, Paul. But for a girl, I do like Sarah, Kyla, Katie, Megan, Anna Marie, and Allison, Shigo said, turning around and resting against the counter. I like those names too, Draken said, smiling. What do you think the baby will be? Shigo asked as he came over to her. It doesn't really matter to me. Girl or boy, I'm happy that we're going to be parents in the first place, Draken said, wrapping his arms around her as she rested their arms on the shoulder. I'm so scared, Shigo said, looking deep in his eyes. Why? I'm scared because I keep having this feeling that something is going to be wrong with her baby, or something is going on in the hospital, or if her heart stops beating, she said with a worried look on her face. Shigo, don't ever think that, Draken said, pulling her closer to where their bodies are pressing against each other. Why do you think something bad like that will happen to our child? He asked. I don't know. It's just in my heart I feel that something bad is going to happen to her, Shigo whispered, resting her head on the chest. Draken ran his fingers through her hair as she closed her eyes. You think it's a girl, don't ya? All mothers can tell. It's a gift, Shigo said, her eyes closed but smiling. I want a girl too, Draken asked, sweetly kissing the top of her forehead gently. Looking up, and Shigo smiled. You do? She asked, happily. Yeah, I do. And with that, Shigo and Draken leaned closer together and kissed, kissing more and more as Draken picked her up and her legs wrapped around his waist. I love it when she does that, he thought, holding her gently, never letting it fall. After kissing, Draken let Shigo back on the ground, and they both were breathing heavily. What did you want for dinner? She asked, smiling and walking over to the stove. I'll have anything that doesn't really matter to me, Draken said, going to the living room and turning on the fireplace. Honey? Draken asked, coming back to the room and seeing that she had gotten a glass of wine and filled it with red wine. Walking over, she gave it to Draken, who dropped the ice cubes in it. Enjoy, she said, walking back to the stove, raising one eyebrow in confusion as he looked down at the blood-red drink. Shigo, you know I don't drink that often. Why only when I'm depressed or something evil like that? He said, laughing a bit. You're not depressed, are you? She said in that voice that Draken had never heard in her before. What's up with you? You were like fine 2 minutes ago. You're acting strange, Draken said, putting his drink down on the table. I'm fine. I just thought that you might like something to drink, she said honestly. Draken shrugged his shoulders and sat down and took a sip of the red wine. It's good, thank you, my dear, he said, drinking more and more. Shigo cooked her meal, and finally Draken was done his second glass of wine and was wearing a googly smile. Do you wish that we both got out more? He said, looking at her dreamily. Yeah, I do, except our reputation would be ruined, she said, looking down. Well, I have made some formula to do what? Shigo asked, tilting her head to the side, always looking at him for an answer. Draken sighed as he put his hand on his knees. I'll go try it out. I'll be right back, he said. And then he left the room. Draken walked to his lab. His lab was always very messy, but he knew what he was looking for. Walking over to the refrigerator, which had a small and white, opened it up and took out a small glass tube that purple and black blue liquid swirling around it. Shutting the door, he knew there was a chance to be taken, so he held his breath for a second and then quickly gulped down the liquid. Ew, this tastes like cough syrup, he thought as he looked down at the empty tube. Walking back over to the fridge, he suddenly fell on his knees and held his stomach in pain. Looking down at the pain, dizzy was getting worse. It felt like he had a hole in his stomach being torn apart. Tears streamed down his face as he looked up and let out a cry of pain. Everything was dizzy. He felt his body getting smaller and smaller. His clothes were getting left behind. Wrapping his arms were getting smaller and skinnier around his body until he felt a cold, heavy wind. All this was happening. Draken knew it was going to be okay, but it felt like he was coming home from being in dreamland with Drake and Sheena. Draken missed them so much and always been reminding him of they were with him since birth and will be until death because they were in his mind. Finally, after a few moments of trauma and suspense that had just happened, he was lying on his stomach and was freezing cold. Opening his eyes and looking around still with his head resting on the ground, everything seemed much bigger. Getting up and sitting on his knees, he had then realized he was naked. Letting out a small cry, he covered his body and started to shiver. Stopping and thinking what had just happened and why he needed that drink, he looked at his arms again and the light blue legs and smiled evilly. Wiggling his little toes, he smiled and laughed. Draken's body had gone back in time and he was now 4 years old again. "Wow, I cannot believe it actually worked," he said, giggling joyfully. Looking around, he realized he was sitting in the dark blue lab coat. It was soft. "What am I going to wear?" Draken said to himself, looking around the oversized room until he saw a neatly laid out shriveled black chair that had a smiley face on it and dark blue shorts with black sneakers. Standing up, he looked down at his whole body. He was small and fragile and remembered that he was really like and when he really was 4 years old. Looking it down, he thought, "Geez, I must have grown a lot." He thought evilly, but laughed out loud, untangling himself to his blue jacket and pants. He hurried over to his new cloths and put them on, walking over to his table and climbed on the chair and stood up. On the table, it looked like a mirror. "I always knew it was cute," Draken said, forgetting how cute he really was at 4 years old. His chair was about the same, black and wavy, but it wasn't spiked like how it was when he was an adult. He knew he had a few freckles on his face and was much smaller. Climbing off the chair, he wondered how Shigo was doing with her dinner. "Man, she's probably gonna kill me when she sees me like this. I hope she doesn't faint," little Draken thought to himself as he hurried upstairs. Peeking through the cracked door, he saw Shigo pouring him some more wine, tossing some shrimp in a dark metal pan over the fire-spitting stove. Draken had never seen Shigo from his height, and he thought that she looked beautiful. Draken wasn't a pervert, of course, but sometimes he just had his urges towards Shigo that he had never felt in his entire life. Taking a deep breath, he opened the flapping door and stood in front of it. He was so scared he could even feel the blue palms getting sweaty as he dug into his pockets. "Hello, Shigo," Draken said, looking nervously at her. She hadn't recognized his voice because he was 4 and was small and squeaky. Throughout his life, when he was 14 or so, his voice started to get deeper and more raspy. The voice that he had when he was just an adult, jumping and turning into her frightening position. She looked around until she saw a little boy who looked like Draken, and he would be younger, standing in the doorway. Her face dropped and so did her mouth as she slowly walked over to him, frightened and confused as ever. Who are you?" she asked, rubbing her eyes as if she was checking to see if she was screaming or not. "Shigo, it's me, Draken," he said quickly, smiling back in to show that he wasn't scared. "Drew?" she said. Her face went totally white. With that, her eyes rolled back a bit and fell to the ground. "Shigo," Draken said, rushing over to her to see if she was okay. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry," Draken said, putting his hand on her forehead to see if she was hot or something. "Shigo?" Draken said slightly, shaking her. His face was in the scowl as he made it harder. "Shigo!" Draken yelled, but he didn't mean to yell, and that shook harder, because he was upset and nervous, that he was scared that she had hurt herself from that fall. Shigo's eyes started to flutter. She looked at him. "Oh my gosh, Draken, is that you?" she thought, stumbling to her feet and looking at the small child, who had big baby diamond black eyes. "In the flesh," he said, giggling nervously. "What the heck happened to you?" Shigo said, mortified, but then seeing how cute Draken was. "Well, do you remember how I went to my lab? Well, I have been doing some experiments. I came up with a solution so we could finally go on public now, he said, smiling. Shigo was as white as ever, as she just walked over to the stove and started to stir the shrimp again. Why didn't you tell me? She said, looking at him, and he was pulling on her pant leg for attention. I wanted to see if it works first. I'm sorry, Draken said, looking down sadly. Shigo walked over and took his glass of wine and dumped it down the drain. She then kneeled down and picked him up under his arms. Whoa, Draken said, a little shocked at first, but he hadn't been picked up in the air while holding her arms out. She held him tight so he wouldn't fall. She looked at his sweet arm and face and examined his body. You're my Drew, Shigo said, smiling and recognizing him. Draken smiled and opened his small little arms as she brought him in for a hug. I'm so sorry. I'm happy she understands, Draken said, thought to himself, as he hugged her more. Letting him down, he ran off to his seat. Oh great, my feet don't touch the ground, he said, rolling his little eyes and putting his normal scowl on his face. Shigo laughed as she gave him some shrimp. She got a plastic cup and poured him some ice water and sat down with her meal and started to eat. Water? He asked, looking at her as if she had green eyes. Yeah, no, Drew. You're not having wine while you're a child. Now please eat your meal before it gets cold, Shigo said, in her normal snappy tone. Draken was annoyed, but shrugged as his shoulders started to poke at the tender pink shrimp. Shigo couldn't believe what he had done with himself. I mean, she had seen him, felt like she was dreaming. Even eating her dinner, she kept looking up, making sure he didn't notice. And when she saw him, her heart felt warm and loving. It was as if Draken was her child and they had lived alone. God, I can't believe he did that. He's so cute, though, Shigo thought as she finished her dinner. After dinner, Draken told her that he was going to be going back to his normal body. Taking her down the stairs and opened the fridge, pulled out a tube that was red and yellow colors swirling inside. Give me my cloths and when I'm about back to normal, Draken said, taking off his childhood clothes and standing behind a chair so she couldn't see. Don't worry, you can come out and I won't laugh, she said, laughing already. No, you don't need to see me naked when I'm 4 years old, he said, snapping at her. Shigo shook her head and laughed as Draken let out a cry as he held his stomach. He fell to the ground. Now, Shigo heard his cry and flew out of the chair and rushed over to him. Shigo's eyes were wide when she saw him, all in the ball, crying in pain. Drew, oh my God, are you okay? She screamed as she cradled him in her arms. He clinged onto her shirt and he started to cry. Shigo was panicking as she thought he was having a seizure. It's working, Draken chalked out, saying as his little body started to shake rapidly. Oh God, please be okay, Shigo thought, as suddenly Draken's small body started to grow. He was changing. Shigo stepped back, and was amazed and frightened of what she saw. Finally, he was back to his old self, and he stood up and looked around. Draken put his hand on his forehead and blinked his eyes. Okay, yes, I'm back, Draken said happily, as he noticed that he was tall again and had his regular body. Smiling, he saw Shigo, who was scared and pressed her in the wall, heavy breathing. Draken, you're okay, Shigo said, running to him, tall and his regular body. He saw Shigo. Oh, Shigo, I'm so sorry, Draken whispered in her ear, as he heard her breathing heavily. I don't ever want you to do that again. You scared me to death, she whispered, burying her head in his chest. Then, realizing that he had nothing on, she immediately felt embarrassed and stepped back. What's wrong? Shigo asked, pulled away from her. Can I have my clothes, please? He asked, blushing. No, you look fine, Shigo said, laughing, but only joking. Shigo, I'm cold, he whined. Shigo laughed as she got his clothes and gave it to him. After getting his pants on at least, Shigo couldn't help but look. She was laughing so much. Very immature, but she was just as happy that he was all right. Getting dressed, they both headed up the stairs and got ready for bed. Draken held Shigo that night as they were asleep under his arms until she drifted off to sleep. I love you, Shigo, he whispered, and with that Draken had fallen off to sleep. Getting up for breakfast, Shigo slipped out of bed and realized that Draken was already downstairs. Shigo had decided to wear a nice light green sweater and a black shirt. He also wore shoes, leather boots for what went up her whole leg. Fixing her hair, she just went downstairs to find Draken in the kitchen, reading the Villains Weekly and drinking his coffee. "Morning, Draken," Shigo said, walking and pouring herself some orange juice. Draken smiled and looked from his paper as she walked in. "Good morning, Shigo. Did you sleep well?" he asked. "Yeah, how about you?" Shigo said, smiling, coming to sit across from him as she ate a biscuit. "Good. Very good. Thank you," Draken responded to her question. "Anything exciting happening in our school?" She asked, drinking some juice as Draken scanned the pages with his normal scowl. "No, not today," Draken said. The scanner the pages one more time before he put them down and drank the rest of his dark brown coffee. "So, Draken, about yesterday, about you being a baby boy and all, I think I'll get rid of the formula and won't use it again," Draken said, sitting back down in his chair, folding his arms. "No, what I was going to say before you cut me off was that I want you to use it, but only if it doesn't hurt you," Shigo said firmly, but then in a worried tone. Draken looked at her and realized that he had hurt her somewhat, and the kind of hurt he felt though was being frightened. "Shigo, it didn't hurt me." "Oh, okay, maybe it did, but it only hurts while the process is working, and I'm going from a child then back to normal me or opposite to that. I felt so horrible last night. I thought I had hurt your heart," Draken said, looking at her, with her face going from a scowl to heartwarming frown. Yes, a heartwarming frown. Shigo couldn't take it any longer. Her lower lip was quivering, and she flew out of her chair and ran into his arms, sobbing like crazy as she buried her head into his chest and sat down on his lap as he held her in his arms. "It's okay. Shh, don't cry," Draken whispered, kissing her head and rubbing her back as she is trying to calm her down. Shigo looked up and with her eyes and looked at him. I don't know what's wrong with me. I mean, I've been crying 24/7. It's just so annoying," Shigo said, laughing a bit. "It's the baby, honey," Draken said calmly. "What?" Shigo asked, not understanding what he was saying. "I said it's the baby. You're just so moody and you can't help it. So if you need to cry all day, you just go ahead and cry," Draken said, smiling kindly at her as he gently pulled the hair out of her face. Shigo smiled and blushed a little bit, and then went over and poured herself some more orange juice. "Your mother is coming tomorrow," Shigo said, reminding him. "Yeah, I know," Draken said, looking out of the glass window and into the deep, non-disturbed woods. "What? You don't want to see her all of a sudden?" No, not that at all. I'm very happy to see my mother. I mean, it's been 8 years after all, and I guess I'm just nervous," Draken said quickly. "She is your mother. Why are you so nervous? She won't hurt you," Shigo said. "I know she won't hurt me, Shigo. It's just both our lives change ever since it happened," Draken sadly said, looking down. "What is it?" she asked in her normal sarcastic tone. Draken let out a long deep breath and rubbed his eyes. "I'll tell you later," he said, getting up and walking out of the room. Shigo held her glass and watched as he left the room. "And I thought I was the moody one," she thought as she turned and walked to the long glass window and watched some nature wake up outside of their lair as she drank her juice. Draken often, on the other hand, went downstairs and walked into his office. His office was dark and was neater in his lab. It was still messy and he refused to clean it up. In an annoyed way, he brushed off some papers that laid on the brown leather chair, and she sat in it, resting his elbows on his desk, and rested his head on the palms and letting out a deep sigh of sadness. God, I miss him, Draken thought, as he remembered what it was like coming home from the hospital with his broken arm, and then having to talk with his father when it happened. Been right out in front of them. It happened. Blood splattering against the brick wall. His head was being smashed in. terrible screams. "Drew?" Shigo said, knocking on the door. "What?" he said quickly, jumping out of his chair, not knowing he had fallen asleep. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know if you wanted to rest. I'm gonna go upstairs and get the house ready for your mother and come and have a word with me in the henchman room about their manners before she arrives," Shigo said, winking, leaving him with his heart beating very fast as being surprised from that. "I must have fallen asleep, I guess," Draken thought, as he looked into his right and saw the living bookshelf with many books on it. Some books were hanging out by threads, others were deeply pushed in. His eyes scanned each book spine until he noticed one that made him freeze. Getting up out of his leather-brown chair, Draken walked over and pulled a brown book that read Lipsky Family, written in the colors of golden spine. On the color of the brown, large books held a picture. It was a picture of Abby standing up with Greg at her side, with his arms around her. In Abby's arms, rolling up a little bundle, was Draken, only a few days old. Draken smiled as he looked down at himself and his family. "I would have everything to have them back," Draken thought as he came over and sat down onto the chair with the album on his hands. Opening the first page was the first picture of Abby and Greg when they were first born. Abby, when she was born, had a little bit of brown hair on her forehead, and she had big baby blue eyes and rosy cheeks. In this picture, she was lying back, and she was a little pink fuzzy baby suit. Draken smiled and looked down at his mother when she was born, and he looked over at his father's picture. Greg was just as cute, smiling up at the camera. He was waving his little arms in the air, as his big hazel eyes were crystal clear and was a little bit pale. Greg was bold when he was born, and Draken closed his eyes as he felt a leap of sadness come into his body as he started to close the book, and then stopped, realized he couldn't hide it forever. He opened the book and turned over to the next page. On the next page were pictures of Abby when she was growing up, and there were pictures of Greg in some way. Greg would always try and be cool and hang out with the crowds, but he would always be picked on, just like Draken did when he was a child. Abby, on the other hand, was a gift from God. She was delicate and gentle to everything she had saw and touched. Abby had many friends during school, and every boy wanted to date her. Draken always wondered why his mother fell in love with Greg, who was sloppy and immature sometimes and a bit forgetful. But every time he would ask her, she would just get this look in her blue, deary eyes and say, "Drew, it was love at first sight, and she was meant to be." Looking at it more and more pages, things started to get harder and harder for Draken. Coming up on the page that was just old and a bit little torn up was him when he was born. Draken smiled, and she looked at the page with the little baby boy with black diamond eyes and a light blue bunny suit. When this picture was being taken, little Draken was playing with his number one childhood toy, his brown teddy bear that had two black button eyes and was fuzzy. "I think I should stop," Draken thought to himself as he put the book down on his table and went to the window and leaned his hand on to support it, taking his right hand and placed it onto where his belt was. "God, it still hurts sometimes," Draken thought, closing his eyes, running his fingers over the mark that was left on his body. After a few moments of remembering the past that changed his life forever, he walked out of his office and closed the door, making sure it was locked, and hurried upstairs to see how Shiga was doing, and wondering if she needed any help with anything at all. Little did he know someone was trying to find his secret book of memories that he once lived, and in his life would never be the same after that person found out the truth. What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, stay pretty.